Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm Elesif, and today I want to walk you through more detail on our Zip Farm indoor farming system. So I want to start by giving you a good overview of kind of a starting package that our farmers typically start with, talk about the costs associated with that package. Then we can move on to looking at some revenue numbers with that package and what pricing we're using to get this projection. And then today we'll close out by taking our revenue number and looking at the cost associated with running that farm and look at the percentages of costs in comparison to that revenue. So by the end of this, I hope you have a really good feel for the potential with the Zip Farm indoor farming system. So let's get started. Our baseline system that our farmers are usually starting with and then scaling from is around 15 of our zip racks. And the zip racks hold 16 to 30 towers. We're going to keep it on the low end and assume we're just using 16 per zip rack, and we have a total with that of 192 towers. For the system, we'll also need 2 light racks, and a system of this size will take about 500 to 600 square feet, just depending on what's included. And then our starting price for a system of this size is usually around $115,000. So now let's take a look at the potential revenue, assuming we have 192 towers in operation in our Zip Farm. For our example today, we're going to use a 50-50 split between herbs and greens. More specifically, we're focused on lettuce and basil. With lettuce and basil, we get around 5.6 pounds per tower on average, and we have a 3.6 turn time with these crops. So we're looking at about 300 pounds of production per week. The other thing to note here is that we use pounds per tower rather than plant sites, which may be a little bit different if you're doing some research into other systems. The reason we do this is because we need to have flexibility in the planting for each specific crop. So like lettuce, heirloom heads of lettuce, we can space a lot closer than, let's say, kale or Swiss chard, something that grows a lot bigger. So we want to have that flexibility in the system, and we also want to stay focused on how you're selling your produce, and that is usually in pounds or ounces. So we'll take that production data and plug in our pricing to get that revenue number. So in order to get our pricing, we went to some local grocery stores here and used the wholesale price. So if you're curious how to get down to that wholesale price, because it's a very conservative number to use for projections, you can take a look at that retail number in a grocery store and assume a 40 to 50% markup. So if you're working backwards, take that retail price and multiply it by 0.667. That'll get you down to that estimated wholesale price. Most of our farmers are getting higher pricing than that, but once again, we want to keep this projection and all of our projections very conservative. It's always a good thing if your prices go up. So in our market here, we found that a $3.50 per pound price for greens was pretty standard, and $1 an ounce wholesale for herbs was very standard. So that is our baseline. Once again, very conservative. Your revenue number can go up if you increase the amount of retail sales you're making, so direct to consumer, and if you increase the amount of herbs you're growing. The more herbs you can grow, the better. With our 50-50 split at wholesale pricing and a 10% cushion, so we're taking 90% of our revenue number that we're calculating in our production estimates calculator, that brings us to $130,000 a year in revenue. This is our really conservative starting point if you're looking at potential revenue with the Zip Farm. Once again, these are really conservative numbers, and we always like using conservative numbers when we're projecting or forecasting for a future build. But when it comes down to it, our farmers are not getting commodity prices in the market. Our produce that we're getting out of these systems is super fresh, so much more flavorful, and it's not something that can be competed with on a local level. So we have about 149 pounds per week for both basil and lettuce. So this is a lot of production, but I want to take you to one of our farmers, Ryan, who's actually seeing double these numbers.
Oh, for basil specifically.
Per tower.
Oh, per tower.
Yeah.
10 to 12 pounds per tower.
Wow.
Or more.
That's a lot of basil.
It's a lot of basil, yeah. And we planted half the farm in basil all at once, and it all matured at the same time, just like when we first started up, just to get stuff going. And so we wound up giving it away. We donated a bunch of it to a couple food shelves and nonprofits here in the Twin Cities, and because it was insane.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That's awesome to see that the production is exceeding our very conservative estimates here. So we're going back to this $130,000 in projected revenue given our 50-50 split of greens and herbs. Let's take a look down here at the costs associated with running this indoor farm. First, our biggest chunk of expenses here are utilities. This includes your lights, water, heating, and cooling. This can change depending on where you're at, but it's a pretty solid number just based on the number of lights we have in this system. The next expense we have here is rent. This is a rent number from one of our farmers in a city. Obviously, it depends on your market, but $1,000 a month is a pretty safe starting point for 500 to 600 square feet. Next, we have costs of goods sold. So this includes packaging, fertilizer, plugs, anything associated with that direct end product. Next, down here we have our labor, and in this scenario, we're assuming 10 hours a week at $15 an hour. So this covers your basic farm tasks of harvesting and replanting. It doesn't necessarily include time for marketing, accounting, more of those administrative tasks. But for your ongoing expenses, this is the labor we're seeing here. Finally, down here at the bottom, we have loan payments, and this is assuming a $50,000 loan, 10 years at 2%, so it's very similar to the USDA microloan. And then finally, down here, we have a few miscellaneous expenses, and that accounts for things like insurance or regulatory costs. So going back to this $130,000, we're seeing 61% of that in profit. So 61% profit margin, we have 10% of that going to your utilities, 9% to rent, 6% to your cost of goods sold and labor, and finally down here, 4% to your loans and 3% miscellaneous. These costs are not going to change. This is where you have the opportunity to really grow your profit margin, like I said, by increasing the amount you're selling to retail and increasing the amount of herbs you're producing. And also just making sure you're getting the price you deserve in the market for your produce. So there's a lot of potential with a system like this. This is a really conservative estimate, but I think it's a really good starting point. All right, another really easy way to take a look at these numbers is by looking at $1 of revenue. In this $1 revenue, we have 61 cents allocated to the profit margin with the remainder associated with your costs. However, none of this really matters unless you can establish yourself in the market and get customers lined up. This is often one of the most overlooked aspects of starting a farm. So we've learned a lot over the years by being out in our local market and selling, as well as helping our farmers do this in their local markets. So we put together this market research guide to help you navigate the waters and make your life a lot less stressful as you go out and do this. So once you invest in this guide, it's $7. You can take the numbers you get by having conversations with chefs, produce managers, taking a look at your local pricing, plug that into the production estimates calculator, which is a free download. And from there, you can get a really good picture of what your revenue numbers look like. Then let's talk. We've helped a ton of farmers through the process of planning their farm, looking at expenses, looking at layouts, helping you from start to finish. So this is just a really good starting point and a way to establish yourself with your customers right away, because that is one of the most important things you can do to ensure your farm is successful. And if you have any questions about these numbers, feel free to contact me or my team. We're totally focused on helping small commercial growers help serve their local markets. So we run through these scenarios all the time with people, and we love to work with you to dig into your local market and see if this is something that can work for you.